The wind came late to that high place, thin and dry as old parchment. It combed the stones around the forsaken tower, lifted the edges of a torn Dornish banner snagged in dead thorns, and whispered through a door ripped from its hinges. The sky was a white glare over red rock. The tower cast no shade worth standing in. It was all light and heat and the scent of iron and dust. Flies droned. Far below, the land fell in long ribs and gullies toward a smear of desert and the faint silver of a river that never reached the sea. They had buried the dead in the hard ground till their hands were raw, piling cairns of sun-warmed stones over men who had been keen and terrible an hour before. Took time, and none of them spoke much while they worked. Ser Arthur Dayne had died with his white cloak torn, and the pale blade slipping from his fingers into the gravel. Ser Gerald Hightower lay with his face in the dust, the vigilant sword broken near the hilt, his mouth full of the silence he had kept. Oswell went was a heap by the low wall, his black bat wings pinned beneath him. 7 men and a boy had stood against 3. What had been written in songs would be argued over by men who had not been there. In the end, there were only stones, only the long, slow work of laying them. Eddard Stark's hands would not stop smelling of blood, no matter how often he scrubbed them with sand. He tore a strip of his cloak to bind a cut on his forearm. The air tasted of tin. It felt wrong to leave the white cloaks there, beneath rock rather than in their white septs. Wrong to mound stones over the pride of the South and call it proper. He did it anyway and set a bare branch between the stones for each man, a mark for no one to see unless they climbed to the roof of the world to look. Howland Reed watched him from the scant shade on the far side of the broken arch. Reed was smaller than Ned remembered from the green games of their youth, or else it was that he had grown taller in the years since. Mud and blood stiffened Reed's braids. The Crannogman's eyes were like still pools whose fish did not rise. "It is done," he said, when the last stone was in place. In the tower's highest chamber, a bed had been made of cloaks and clean linen, and there she lay, long dark hair damp at her temples, breath shallow and rapid. The room kept the heat. The walls themselves seemed to exhale it, until even the shadows burned. He had thought it would be different to see her again, that the years would fall away, that he would be a boy with skinned knees chasing after his wild sister through the godswood, that he would look once and know her at once as the Lyanna who had made the yard ring with wooden swords. Instead, there was only this woman on a bed, not the girl in his memory. The shape of her mouth was the same. She knew him, though, when the pain let her. "Brother," she whispered, without strength for more. A child slept in a cradle of woven reeds beside the low window. Reed had fashioned it from the dry river canes. A stranger's wet nurse tended the boy when the fever permitted. "Willa," she had said, from Starfall. She fed him, sang to him in a language Ned did not know, and watched him with the candid seriousness with which a shepherd watches a lamb. Ned had thought to hate her for what she represented. In the end, he had not the heart for it. The boy's hair was dark, his mouth small. When he woke, his eyes were a blue so bright it hurt, and then they shifted, as babes' eyes do, toward gray. Lyanna's fingers, cold and damp, caught his. "Listen," she said. He bent close and listened. Behind her words ran the faint hiss of the river down in the heat-hazed valley. He thought of winter rivers, black and cold under ice. He thought of a godswood's quiet. He thought of a promise that would knot him to the rest of his life as tight as a ship's hawser. He did not argue with her. He only nodded until she closed her eyes. They carried her down from the tower at dawn, when the rocks were still cool and pink, and wrapped her in such white as they had. Ned put his sister beneath stones as well. The rest of his life would be measured from that cairn like distances from a milepost. When he rose, he was dizzy with heat and exhaustion, and blood sang in his ears. The pale sword Arthur Dayne had yielded lay wrapped in oilcloth near their gear, heavy and strangely gentle somehow, as if even muffled it had a way of catching light. Dawn, they called it. A sword forged before the first maesters had learned to write men's deeds in soft black lines. Dayne had borne it as a trust, not a tool. Ned had thought of keeping it for a dusk, letting the blade lie against his knees one night and looking at the stars with it on the ground beside him. He could not. Winterfell had the sword his father had used. Dayne's blade belonged to Danes. He sat on a hot rock and wrote a letter in a cramped and careful hand that had never loved quills. The ink stepped where his fingers shook. He wrote 2 names that could not live in the same line without spilling blood into the margins. He set down the tale as he knew it and as he had seen it. He spared the words he could, but he did not spare himself. He told Prince Doran Martell of Sunspear that his sister had not been stolen from her bower screaming. He told him she had gone, that there had been vows spoken beneath a tree with no leaves, that men in white had chosen to stand at a small, dry promise tower while the ruins of a once great realm split apart by the sea. He told him that Elia's children had been butchered, that there was no honor in that, and that their mother had deserved a grave in cool shade, not a smear on stones. He wrote, "The boy will be thought mine." He wrote, "It is necessary." He wrote, "I can promise silence and honor, and I can promise justice." He wrote, "Give me Sunspear." He sealed it with wax pressed by the dire wolf of Winterfell, though the wax had grown soft in the heat. Reed watched him without comment. Willa held the child and sang in a soft murmur that made the words smaller and rounder than common speech. Ned sent the letter by a hill rider who could run as a stag and sleep like a badger, and who knew the goat tracks that slipped downriver toward sandstone and the sea. "Ride," Ned said, and the man rode. They went to Starfall with the sword wrapped in oilcloth. The high-crowned palms around that castle had a music all their own, and when the moon rose, it showed white walls as pale as bone. The pale stone sword was a tower as tall as any wish, and it was there, beneath its shade, that Ned placed Dawn across the arms of a woman whose face he had never forgotten and had never truly known. Ashera Dane received him in black without jewelry, her eyes no longer fitted to laughter. It had been said by boys and drunk lords that her eyes were the color of twilight over water. Ned did not think of the words. He saw only grief. "He is dead," Ned said. She had the dignity not to ask which he meant. "We heard," Ashera said, her voice the breath of a candle. "Dorne hears quickly when the wind is right. We heard of Elia. They say lions did it as lions do. We heard of my brother at the Trident, and that was a lie. We know he fell elsewhere. In a place with no name," Ned said. "He was a knight in truth to the last. There is no shame in it." She touched Dawn's wrapping as if afraid it would cut her through the cloth. "This belongs to a Dane," she said. "It is a weight meant for us. Yet when Arthur took it, he said it was a watchword. I had not thought to see it again in my life." "Nor had I," Ned said. The brown river below the castle made an old man murmur among stones. "The boy in the tower was," he stopped. "There is a difference between the truth and the speaking of it." He wanted to say her name and could not. "He has need of a nurse." Willa, summoned, lifted her eyes quick as a bird's. She did not ask the mother's name. She did not need to. The babe made small fists, struck air, settled again. "I will go where he goes," Willa said. "I will feed him and I will lie for him. I have lied for highborn babes before. It is a wet nurse's trade." "There will be songs," Ashera said. "There are always songs. I will not listen to them." She raised her face to Ned. "They will say that his mother was a serving girl or a lady or a witch. They will say that she leapt from the pale stone sword, or that she lives in a cave. They will talk until the stories are better than the truth. Does it comfort you, Lord, to know the truth will be swallowed?" "No," Ned said. "It binds me to what I have to do." He watched the river and saw only snow. "I have written to Prince Doran. I asked to come to him." "You will come," she said. "Not every man would. Many would go north and wrap himself in winter and pretend none of this is his to tend. You are not many." She touched the oilcloth and the pale suggestion of the sword beneath it. "Leave the blade. Go to Sunspear. It is a slow place. They will hear you in the end." He went by the Boneway for speed, with a light company and Reed at his side. The track climbed into teeth of stone, the air a furnace broken by cold lungs of night. They slept where rock overhung rock, wrapped in their cloaks, and when they woke, they were coated with the grit of old ground that had been sleeping longer than men had counted years. No rain. Lizards with throats like flags watched them pass and ran when horses clinked. In the passes, wind said things that might have been warnings if a man were given to understanding the talk of air. They reached Kingsgrave and then the Queen's Crown of Sandstone, and at last the wide plain where Sunspear rose like a spear planted in flat ground and never pulled free. The spear tower stabbed at a brilliant sky. The tower of the sun glowed. The old palace crouched among palms and courtyards, all the corners full of water. Dorne loved water the way the North loved fire. They never had enough of it. Prince Doran received him seated with his back to an open arcade where wind moved thin white curtains with a sound like the turning of pages. He was not the heavy, gout-hobbled man that the older lords liked to make him with their jokes. He was narrow and careful, with a scholar's hands. His beard was neat and black and shorter than fashion. He had a way of looking without blinking that told a supplicant that when he answered, the answer would not be the first thought that came to him. Behind and a little to the left stood a great man with shoulders like an oaken door and a long-hafted axe whose head showed silver where the edge had been set and set again. The big man's eyes were calm. He missed nothing. His name, Ned learned later, was Hoda of Norvos. Oberyn Martell was in the room as well, though he could not have been more different from his brother. Oberyn delighted in moving. He could not sit. He went to the arched window and looked at the sea, came back, crossed to the low table and poured wine in 3 cups with a flourish, left one untouched and drank the other, and then laughed at nothing that had been said. He was a slender man, a blade rather than a hammer, quick-eyed, with a sardonic mouth that could be made tender in a breath and cruel in the next. He wore no jewels. He did not need them. Everything about him said that he was accustomed to the world leaning toward him when he spoke. "Lord Stark," Doran said when the greetings were made, "you wrote me a letter." Ned knelt his knee because it seemed right to do so in another man's halls. "I did, Prince. I wrote what I did not think ever to write to another soul. I wrote because I will require of you silence where I should not ask it, and aid I have no right to command. I wrote because there are children to consider. There are always children. You would ask Dorne to keep another northern secret," Oberyn said lightly. "We keep our own as a rule. We keep them in jars and on the old maps and in the names of the winds." Doran's hand made a small, mild motion. It meant do not pick at him. "Lord Stark," he said, "your letter has been in my hand long enough to wear creases into the parchment. I have read your words the way a man reads an old judgment, looking for the place the law puts its knife in. I have asked my maesters to tell me every story of that tower on that ridge. I have heard my own men tell me what they saw when they found what Tywin Lannister soldiers did in King's Landing." His voice did not crack on the name. Darkened. "I have no voice left to weep for my sister. My son saw me weeping. That is enough." Ned bowed his head. "I do not expect forgiveness for what is not mine to be forgiven," he said. "I did not come to say that your sister's children were not a wrong. I came to say that I have it in me to kill the men who did it, and to see the man who sent them humbled. And I came to tell you a thing that will sit on your tongue until you die." Hoda's axe angling across his chest shifted a hair. The sound was the whisper of a kiss. Ned stood and told them, not trusting a chair to hold him up. He told them what he had seen at the tower. The white cloaks who had refused to yield, the woman on the bed, the child, the last breathing of his sister's plea. He did not say the name of the child's sire. He did not need to. It was there in every other word. He finished and drank his wine for the first time and found it warm and salted at the rim with his own sweat. Oberyn laughed, but it was not a bright sound this time. It was brittle. "Rhaegar Targaryen," he said, tasting the name as if it were a sour lemon. "Our prince of songs. He had a sad mouth, women say. I suppose sadness tastes sweet to ladies. He took your sister by the hand and ruined my sister's bed, and our king, your king now, struck him dead in a river, and lions fed on the meat left behind." Doran looked at the wind. "If this is true," he said, and he had already decided it was, "then the boy in your nurse's arms will be the last of the dragons in the world, the last that anyone must account for, the last a butcher could find a price for." He turned his head and fixed Ned with that deep, bland stare. "You will hide him in the snows and call him your own sin. You will bear the weight of the lie, and your lady will bear a different weight, and Dorne will be suspected in any case if ever it is known." "It will not be known," Ned said, too quickly. He slowed himself. "It will not be known by any man who would use it. I swear it by the old gods and the new. I swear it by every stone I set over every man who fell there." Oberyn prowled to pause at Ned's shoulder, and his heat seemed to touch the air. "You ask us to forgive the last king and hate the new one less," he murmured. "And what do you offer?" "Justice," Ned said. "Justice is a tool men swing at their enemies," Oberyn replied. "Say what stone you wish broken." "Ser Gregor Clegane ordered the breaking," Ned said. "Ser Amory Lorch took the girl for a sport even the stranger turned from. They served Tywin Lannister, who brought gold to King's Landing with one hand and murder with the other. They will answer for it, not in song, in the place where men answer for things." "And if King Robert refuses?" Dorne asked, calm, soft, deadly. "He will not," Ned said. It was partly hope and partly the taste he had for his friend. He had not seen Robert drink men's blood, and he did not want to. He will be king. He must act like one. "Kings do as they please," Oberyn said. "Then they pay or not." Ned bowed again, and held the bow a beat longer than courtesy demanded. "I ask Sunspear," he said. "I ask your men beside mine at the Red Keep, no more than a banner's worth, no less than witnesses. I ask your voice when I say before the lords of the land that this thing was wrong and cannot be the foundation of the new realm. I ask your silence about the babe. And I bring you what I can bring." He glanced at Areo Hoda. The man's face could have been carved from the same pale stone as the tower that had failed to keep Asherah whole. Areo did not blink. It was Doran who did, very gently, as if letting something pass from his sight to memory. "The bones," Doran said. "What will you do with the bones that are not yours?" "I will not let them hang on the gates," Ned said, feeling heat in him that had nothing to do with Dorne. "They were children. I will take them from lions. I will put them in boats and send them to you in quiet and shade, with the highest prayers the sept can afford, and with no mummer's show. I will do that even if Robert holds Tywin Lannister's hand with his in the gates of the city and laughs." Oberyn's mouth turned. "Lions like their claws. They do not like having them pulled." "Then let them roar," Ned said. "Let the realm hear it. Better a lion's roar than the sound of a child crying while no one listens." Doran rose. It was a precise movement, and men moved when he rose. Areo stepped with him. Servants drifted like shadows in a court where shadows were welcome. "You will have Sunspear," Doran said. "You will have no more than 50 of my men. You will have me in ink and seal and the promise in my mouth. Arrive at the city gates with the sun at your back and our spears at yours. Say what you mean to say. I will sign where I should sign. And I will bind my tongue for the boy." He looked out at the bright air and the narrow strip of sea like a sword laid flat upon the sand. "But I will not forget." "I do not ask you to," Ned said, and it was a relief to speak to a man who did not pretend forgetting was virtue. They came into King's Landing at noon with dust on their boots and the sun in their eyes and the smell of burning that never wholly left a city after men had taken it. The gold of the Lannisters hung everywhere it could be hung. Red and gold, and the red was brighter than the gold, and that was wrong. Some G. Atesh had been splintered. Dogs gnawed things that were not for dogs. Citizens watched with the lids of their eyes lowered, as if they feared the sky might drop something else on them. Near the Great September, a woman was sweeping glass into a heap with a willow switch. It made a sound like broken bells. The Red Keep's hills rose, red truly now with dust and with other things. Men in half-fit armor lounged under banners, as if their bodies were tired of standing upright. In the throne room, where Ned went first, the sunlight came in the high windows and fell on iron and more iron, and a boy sat there with golden hair and his sword across his knees like a scolded child who had climbed where he should not. Jaime Lannister's face was too beautiful for the place he had chosen. For an instant, before Jaime smiled, Ned saw the eyes of a cornered stag. "My Lord Stark," Jaime said, laughing with his mouth and not his eyes. "Come and sit." The chair is much taken with me today. Climb down, Ned said. It is not for you. Jaime stood, and if he had thought to bait Stark, he thought better of it when he saw who had come up the aisle with him. Men with sun on their spears despite the shade. Men with brown skin that had seen this heat before and did not fear it. Men whose captain was a mountain with an axe, whose face promised that men could be made to be quiet. Jaime's hand tightened on his sword only long enough for Ned to see the tightening. The king is dead, Jaime said. The king died by my hand. If there is any oathsman here who would challenge that, we may have a little sport. You were sworn to him, Ned said. There was no sport in it. The city would have burnt with all of us in it, Jaime said. Ask your friend the fat spider where the wildfire lay if you like. Ask pyromancers. Ask anyone with more wits than honor. I did not choose to serve a madman above men who do not howl. Ye horsemen. Ned had no answer for that would do justice to the thing. He had no love for the old king, who had burned lords for a night's diversion, who had looked at a girl and seen a thing to spoil, who had put monsters near desks where laws were written. He could not attend to it. We will speak of it when the king sits his place, he said. You will go to your White Tower. You will leave this hall to men who mean to decide what is to be done, not have done with it already. Jaime's smile flashed and went away. Ah, he said. Then we will play the game with different pieces. He stepped down from the iron and made a bow that was almost a parody of respect. My father will receive you shortly. He is curious. He was more than curious. Tywin Lannister filled a doorway by being still. He did not thunder or glower. He came while men were looking elsewhere, and when a man turned, he found that the rest of the hall had turned with him, as if a tide had shifted. He had a gentle mouth, oddly, a mouth made for calm verdicts. He wore a bright breastplate. He had not troubled to clean it of the last of a man's hand. Behind him came his brother Ser Kevin, who was loyalty manifest, and a litter of lesser lions in mail and silk who would speak if their lord thought it useful and be still when it was not. There has been much enthusiasm, Tywin said, with a glance at the banners and the blood that had not yet been wholly scrubbed out of the floor. The city was taken by friends rather than burned by enemies. I judged the king would prefer that. It seems my son was of the same opinion. Ned looked at him and saw a mind like a millstone. Anything thrown beneath it would be crushed to an even grit. The king will judge soon enough, he said. The man who put children on spikes will be judged sooner. Ah, Tywin said. We are to begin with justice. With shame, Ned replied. We are to begin with shame for what was done. There were children, Tywin Lannister. Your men put a prince's head against a wall until it broke. Your man took a small girl and put a knife through her belly from behind because she ran away. There is no place on the other side of that act where a man can stand up straight again. Tywin's eyes did not move from Ned's face. You speak of Ser Gregor Clegane and Ser Amory Lorch, he said. Ser Amory is not possessed of deep thought. He imagines orders where men never spoke them. Ser Gregor is useful to his overlords because he frightens men who otherwise would be idle. I do not condone excess. I do not care for your view of the world as a set of useful tools, Ned said. Send for them. I would have them stand in this hall where your banners hang. Tywin considered the floor with interest. And if I refuse, Lord Stark? Ariohoda answered by taking one small step. The blade of his axe did not flash. It did not need to. He placed it where one would place a book on a desk, as if it were his habit. Doran Martell had not come himself. He had sent his letter, sealed with sun and spear, and 3 men of his blood to bear it who now stood silent as an empty well. Hetton Corgyle of Sandstone was among them, and 2 younger vipers with their prince's looks on lesser faces, and in the gloom at the side of the hall, small folk with their mouths set in that city's careful line which meant, I will remember this and say nothing. Tywin's mouth softened fractionally. Then I look forward to speaking with the king, he said, whose word will be law, as I trust we all know. He bowed barely, turned, and was gone. The room felt colder when he had left it, as if he were a brazier taken away. Robert came 2 days later with the sick-sweet smell of poultice and horse and a lot of men whose loyalty to him felt like heat. He roared like a man who had been caged and free again, and laughed the way he always had when he spied Ned, slamming his arms around him despite the ache of wounds that were not yet old. "You stubborn, haggard, honorable mountain," he said, grinning. "You take the high road through hell and meet me at the top. Gods, it is good to see you." Ned could not laugh. He clapped Robert's shoulder and felt along the ridges of old oaths. "You came," he said. "There is work." "There is always work," Robert said, grinning still. But the grin thinned when he lifted his eyes past Ned's shoulder and saw the Dornish men and the Lannister banners and the strain in the air like the air before a storm. The grin died when they brought Elia's small bones in their clean shroud and set them before the dais, and the cloth fell back and the hair spilled out. "This was not done in my name," Robert said. "It could have been once." There had been a mood upon him after the trident when too much tasted of blood and victory and loss. But even in his worst rage, the thought of a girl with a knife in her back had made him spit and call it cowardice, not sport. He turned, and anyone in the room who thought to guess then what his rule would be had something to hold to. "Ser Gregor Clegane," Ned said, and the mountain came. Gregor walked like a man who bore a piece of fate in his meat. The room flinched away from him as water flinches from a red-hot iron. He was bareheaded. His hair was a hard black, his brow a brutal line, his mouth a wound. Ser Amory Lorch stood to his left as if he stood where he had always stood, his arms lax, his lips negligently wet. Tywin did not stand near them. He took a place among his kin and watched the air between men as if it were the field of battle. On the other side of the hall, Pycelle shifted his maester's chain as if the links were hot. Varys smiled a small smile to himself and hid it under his soft hands. Jon Arryn had not yet slept since he reached the city. Stannis stood behind him with a face like a blade turned on its side. "Tell me," Robert said to Gregor, "tell me what you did at Maegor's Holdfast." Gregor glanced across the room once, toward Tywin, and then looked back at the dais. "I followed my lord's commands," he said. "The city was taken. We were to secure it. A prince and his mother were in the Holdfast. We secured it." "Did you kill them?" Robert asked. It was weary, not cruel. "I did," Gregor said, and there was no apology in it because there had never been one in that man. "I killed the boy. Ser Amory killed the girl. They were dragon spawn." Robert looked at Ned, and Ned did not look away, and something happened between men who had once fought side by side with no thought but the next step. Ned turned to the room. "Ser Gregor Clegane and Ser Amory Lorch," he said. "You are attainted for murder in the taking of King's Landing. You took a child who had thrown no spear and a girl who had thrown no stone. There is no law under heaven that covers you. Do you claim some mercy?" Gregor's silence was a kind of claim. Amory licked his lips again. "We did what was to be done," he said, and his voice had the sleepy sloth of a stabler too long in the hay. "Lord Tywin." Tywin's head turned a fraction. It was remarkable how such a small movement could silence a man. "You will not lay words in my mouth," Tywin said, not loud. "You will not say I said a thing I did not say." "It is enough," Robert said. He was pale under his beard. "You will both lose your heads for this. It will be done now." There was a sound then, a dry half-cough from Pycelle. Tywin did not move. Jon Arryn did, stepping forward as if his bones wanted it. "Your Grace," the old falcon said, using a voice that could be heard in a wind. "If you would grant me this, let the law be seen to be done. Let the accused have a trial. Let the lords hear. It will do in the long run. This realm has seen too many knives in the dark and not enough open words." Robert's jaw flexed. "Very well," he said, and sat as if he had sat under a weight, and looked as if weight suited him less than rage. The trial was brief in the way a thunderstorm is brief. Witnesses were brought. A kitchen boy with eyes too old for his narrow face. A man-at-arms who had kept his place till men were dying around him and then run. A septa whose voice broke only when she tried to speak the princess's name. Varys with his soft assurances that this whisper and that told the same tale, and the fact that he had told no one until after it was done. Pycelle, all dismay and learning, certain that the trident had rinsed away this unfortunate. There were no songs. No one had the heart for songs. Gregor stood and said little. He stared at men and watched them flinch and took his comfort there. Amory Lorch had been born with so few nerves it took the prospect of the sword to quicken what passed for his soul. He charged at the end, as some men do who cannot admit they are what they are, and Ariohota halted him with the flat of his axe in a move as clean as a page turned. That was the only blow struck in the hall. They were taken out to the courtyard where all could see. There had been beheadings there before. There would be again. Ned watched without turning aside. He had learned what he had learned young, in a winter yard under a gray sky, that sometimes mercy was a head on the block and a clean stroke. He thought of Lyanna and did not let himself think of Elia. Men like Tywin would say that a realm was like a table such that it needed all its legs even if some were foul. Ned did not care for the table if it stood on bones. Gregor went down hard and ugly and did not make it easier on the headsman. The headsman made it easier anyway because he had done this under less forgiving suns and moons. Lorch died as emptily as he had lived. When it was done, the wind blew and men breathed again, and the city kept standing, which was something. Afterward there were councils. There are always councils when men have killed other men and must now live somewhere together. Robert sat uneasy on the high chair and drank too much and then set the cup aside and listened to Jon Arryn, who had a way of speaking sense until even men who hated him admitted it was sense. Renly sat at the bottom of the table like a pretty green boy and made jests he ought not, until even he saw that no one laughed and fell silent for once. Stannis spoke little, and when he spoke he sounded as if his mouth were a forge. Pycelle intoned. Varys purred. Ned said what he had to say when the thing needed saying, no more. The rest of the time he let Robert look at him and remember what they had done arm in arm. Tywin Lannister, Robert said at length, is a lord of the realm. He brings more men to the field than any two. He opened the gates. He did me a service. He did himself a service, Ned said. He will do you harm if harm profits him. He thinks of the realm as his meadow and the rest of us as sheep to be sheared with a gentle hand and sometimes a rough one. What would you have me do? Robert demanded, and there was the old note in his voice that meant, help me and do not make me say it. Reject his daughter, Jon Arryn said, before Ned could answer, which was why he was hand and would continue to be hand. Do not bind yourself to that house for the sake of gold and numbers. There are other numbers. The Tyrells will bring wine and grain and ships. The Redwynes will bring more ships. The Tullis will bring river silver and a sober word and Catelyn's good sense. The Dornish will bring silence and not rebellion. That is worth having. Take Tywin's fealty and his taxes. Take hostages to remind him of your affection. Make him pay for his entry with gold, not with placing his seed in the queen's bed. Do not let him think he entered your house by the front door. Robert rubbed his face. He looked at Ned. What do you say? I trust you more than any of these crows. Ned felt in his bones a cold that had nothing to do with wind off the Blackwater. He saw in an instant a dozen paths, most of them leading to darkness. He saw a golden queen who would be a kind of poison to his friend. He saw a Lannister lion lying on the realm and suffocating it in velvet. He saw Dornish spears in a southern wind, and a black-haired prince crawling in a thatch of snow with a wooden sword. Say no to Cersei, he said. Say no to Tywin's claim to be your right hand in anything. Take his oath. Give him less than he gives you. Trust him no farther than you can throw his castle. And let the realm see that you will not pay for peace with a child's blood. This is about Elia, Robert said soft. He ran his hand over the arm of the chair and left sweat prints. Everything is about Elia, since she died. Everything is about what kind of king you will be, Jon Arryn said. If you pardon Tywin the shame, men will say that a king may do anything so long as he smiles when he does it. If you punish his monsters and not him, men will see that there is law. They will stop there. That is enough for now. Varys folded his hands in his sleeves. I have always admired your mind, Lord Arryn. It cuts without drawing blood. Let it cut, Stannis said. Better a clean cut than a rot. His jaw worked. The Lannisters will sulk. I do not care for their sulks. In the meantime, Robert said, the dragon's whelps clutch each other on Dragonstone. The queen, Riella, will whelp another by the look of her. Storms will come and wash the ships away if the gods love me. If they do not, well, Stannis, I suppose you want the place. I want what is the realms, Stannis said, which meant yes. I will take it. Robert groaned and pressed both hands to his head. Take it, then. Take all the places with bad wind and worse fish. Ned, go and walk in the yard before I ask you to put the whole damned world in order. I will have Janna Redwine's husband take the fleet council, or I will drown him. And I will not marry Cersei. Ned found the yard and the relief of dirt under boot heels and men beating one another with staves without any politics in the blows. The heat was ruthless even this late in the day. He thought of Winterfell's cool walls and the sigh of wind in the hunter's leaves. He thought of the Godswood's pool and the heart tree with its face that never changed, and he thought of a babe who had not yet cried for him by any name. When he looked up, he found Varys there, as if Varys were the shade a man had sought. You are very stubborn, Varys said, and there was admiration in it, as if he were describing a boar who had turned its tusks on the hunter. So few men will take a thing and say, this is the only thing I can do, and then do it at any cost. Do not admire me, Ned said. It does not sit well on you. What then? Honesty. Varys smiled. You have bought the Dornish cheap, my lord. 2 heads and a box of bones and a promise. It was very well done. I did not buy them, Ned said. I asked men to trust me. I made it possible for them to do so. Varys's eyes flickered. Trust is a more expensive coin than most men care to spend. You have some, because your face refuses to lie even when your mouth thinks it must. Be cautious. Prince Oberyn will want a more costly vengeance in the end than the coin you have spent. Prince Doran will count the coins and see if it profits him to spend any more at all. It profits him to keep his people from bleeding, Ned said. That is enough. Varys turned his head as if listening to a sound only he could hear. There are some for whom it is not enough. Tywin among them. He will not forgive this public rebuke. He will pretend to. He will go home and count. Let him count, Ned said. In the end, Robert stood up in the hall, before lords who had grown quiet, and denied Cersei Lannister with a simple word that fell like an axe and shocked the room into a moment of pure silence. Tywin's eyes did not change. If there was a man in the world who could make his eyes less honest than they already were, it was Tywin, and even he could not perform that trick. Cersei, in the gallery, scalded Ned with a look and then turned it on Robert and found it slid off him like rain off oiled leather. She left before the king could call for her and walked like a queen anyway. Jaime watched her until she turned a corner. His mouth hardened. You will have what you deserve, Tywin told the heir later, because he did not speak directly to men more than he had to. He said it to his brother in a room with tapestries in which lions fought stags and won. You will have a kingdom where Dornishmen think they can sway policy with swagger. You will have the North thinking honor bites better than a sword. You will have the crown poor and the Tyrells prating about justice. You will have peace, Kevin said, as if it were a word that needed to be said aloud once in a while to remind men it was there. Peace, Tywin said, and the corners of his mouth moved, until their honor takes offense at something else. In any case, we go home. There is work to do. Send men to clear our roads. We will take what we need as we always have. If a king wants anything else from Casterly Rock, he may come and ask for it. The city had a funeral. It had many funerals, but of all the little processions winding through lanes that had seen worse, this one mattered. Elia of Dorne, Princess of Dragonstone and then of Nowhere and Nothing, and her children Rhaenys and Aegon, were carried from the September of Baelor in small caskets with cloths that did not advertise their grief. No drums, no horns, nothing that would make a spectacle of sorrow. Every Dornishman in the city who had come on foot or horse walked behind, and behind them walked women who had not been told to come but had come because girls and mothers had been involved, and behind them walked men who had remembered suddenly that the women in their houses had faces. Ned walked, and Jon Arryn and Robert at last, his injuries protesting the slow pace and his heart protesting things he did not say aloud. The small folk watched with their careful faces and did not jeer. The caskets went onto a vessel that had been dressed with shade and fruit and water as if for living guests. The tide took the vessel at dusk, and by dawn the sails were a triangle like a stitch in the horizon. And then the stitch was gone, and in Sunspear a bell sounded once and then again. Asheridain stood at the water gardens to watch the boat come ashore and did not weep because there were children playing in the fountains and they had laughed as they always laughed, and she would not show them that this day could steal laughter. Dorne took the caskets quietly and placed them in coolness. Oberyn went away by himself for very many hours and came back when his mouth was made for love again instead of knives. He kissed his daughters' heads without a word, and afterward he and Dorne sat in the long shade with a jug of wine between them and spoke of nothing that mattered and everything that did. They both had the look of men who had chosen a path. They would walk it. In King's Landing, Varys visited Pycelle at night with a sprig of something in his hand that smelt delicate and wild. If the king marries a red wine cousin, Varys mused, or some Hightower who is not too pious to bed a man who laughs, we will have vintners in the halls for a generation. Pycelle shook his chain and murmured that the faith would look kindly on a marriage without the stain of incest whispered at it before it began. He did not say Cersei's name, but he did not need to. Lord Tywin will be wounded by this slight. I expect he has been wounded more grievously, Varys said. Wounds like this are instructive. They teach a certain caution. He turned the sprig over in his hands. You have read the pink letter, I suppose? He added, as if speaking of weather. Pycelle stiffened. I do not know what. The letter, Varys said, patient. In which the Lord of Winterfell, who calls himself merely a lord though he could be so much more, promises our Prince of Dorne the silence that keeps the last dragon safe. It was unwise of him to write anything at all. But then, Ned Stark believes there are things that must be said once to be sworn to, and then never again. He is right. It is why I prefer him. One can predict the honorable, whereas the clever are like birds with no bells. Pycelle's eyes were wet with the habit of sentiment. The dragon is dead, he said quickly, as if speed could make it true. Prince Viserys is at Dragonstone, alone save for his lady mother. The queen is with child. She is always with child. A storm will solve what men cannot. Perhaps, Varys said, but storms are an unreliable ally. He lifted the sprig to his nose and breathed it in. When the new king rides to the Trident and sets his crown on his head, I think perhaps he will remember the island in the bay where children play in water and the man who sent him bones, and he will remember also that Tywin Lannister was told no. That is a useful story to tell about the beginning of a reign. Ned wrote to Winterfell in a hand that betrayed how quickly he needed the words to leave him. He told Catelyn that he was coming with a child in his arms whose name would be Jon. He did not tell her why the name mattered to him. He promised her, as far as he ever promised anyone anything in writing, that it was only the one sin. He put his daughter in the letter without knowing her yet. He put a son there as well, because the future is a shape men trace with words before it is real. He told himself he would tell her everything one day, then told himself he would not. He sealed the letter and found Howland Reed in the shadow of a lantern and trusted him with the rest. I will go back by the swamps, Reed said. I will go where a man who does not know the way cannot follow. I will keep close. The boy will not be the first child hidden in reeds. Thank you, Ned said. He had not thanked a man properly since the tower. I mean it. The word is too thin and I mean more than it, but I do not have another one. Reed smiled with his eyes and not his mouth. You are a man who keeps the words he has, he said. That is rarer than men with many words they do not spend. Robert was crowned. He had a stag hammered in gold and set on his brow, and wine hammered into his veins, and he laughed and wept and made oaths and broke one or two in the same breath. And afterward he lay in his bed and let the maester pick at him like a careful old crow. He did not marry that year. On a morning when mist lay on the Blackwater like breath on a mirror, he stood with Ned on the city walls and looked out at the ships and the gulls and the fog. I loved her, he said out of nowhere. The gulls laughed. I loved her, nederst. It is ridiculous to say it, because I loved the girl in my head, and she was not the girl in your sister's head, and certainly not the woman in any man's bed. But there it is. I loved her. I will not wear a golden lion just to spite a corpse." Ned set a hand on his friend's shoulder and felt the thick life of him underlaying everything like the earth. "Do not," he said. "Do what is right because it is right. Spite the living only when they have earned it." Robert snorted. "You always did have a way with liberty of phrase. John Aaron wants a quiet match. He says a red wine girl will bring me grapes and peace. I would prefer to wed my sword." "Marry the realm," Ned said. "Then marry your sword when there is time to polish it." They both laughed then, and most of the people in the city who saw them on the wall lifted their hats or their hands, because if the king and his wolf laughed, perhaps the winter that had fallen on the city since the sack could lift a finger. Then Robert grimaced, clutching at his ribs, and they went below. Tywin Lannister left King's Landing without a fuss. He took his men out by the Rosby Road the way water leaves a basin when the stopper is pulled, having first made certain that, when the stopper went back in, it would be by his hand. He left a captain with a scar and a harmless smile to represent Lannisport's interest at court, and he left debts, which he always left, and a promise to return if called, which he never meant. Cersei rode in a litter whose drapes were drawn, and when they opened to let air in, the sun found her beauty intact and improved by anger. Jaime rode beside, slick as a cat, his white cloak as clean as if no man's blood had ever been near it. As they crossed the city, small folk watched them from doorways and corners. Almost none of them bowed. Jaime's horse shied by a puddle, and he checked it gently with his knee and did not show his teeth, because he had learned something about showing teeth when men watched. "Father," Cersei said softly, when they had passed through the last gate. "We were shamed. We were checked," Tywin said. "Men move on a board. If you are not king, you are moved. We will move. Do you wish to be a queen, daughter?" "Yes," she said, and there was nothing girlish in it. "Then be patient," Tywin said. "Kings growing fat on wine are easier to net than kings swimming in their blood." He did not add that there was more than one net in the world, more than one king, more than one way to close a fist. He did not need to. She had his eyes when she was not looking in a mirror. In the north, winter had come in sullen gusts and gone again like a sulky boy sent from the table. The godswood had shed its leaves half-heartedly. When Ned Stark rode in, the keep seemed to exhale. The gatehouse had the shape of home that nothing else could mimic. Catelyn was on the steps when he came. His heart rose at the sight of her, as it always rose at that red gold hair like autumn set ablaze in the sun. It fell again when he saw the way her mouth firmed when she saw the bundle in Willa's arms. "This is John," he said, and they did what people do. They took the baby and weighed him as if he were an answer. He was as heavy as any answer and as light. "He is mine." Catelyn took a breath that might have cut her. "Very well," she said at last, her voice even and proud and hurt in a way he could feel in his bones. "Then I will be lady to him as I am to yours. And I will know nothing more than that, Eddard Stark, for if I know more it will kill the part of me you married." She smiled without showing teeth, because ladies have long practice in smiling without surrender. "We will speak of it once. Then we will put it in a room inside ourselves and lock the door. Do you understand me?" "I do," he said, and it was both a blessing and a burden. He went that night to the heart tree. The air smelled of wet earth and the old tannin of leaves, the pleasant rot that feeds the next spring. He stood under the pale face cut by hands whose names were gone, and listened to the water drip and the distant forge ring, and to a wolf cry out on the moor. He said the names of his dead as a man must. He said the names of men he had buried under stones far away. He said Lyanna's name. He did not say the name of the child's father, not even there. A raven came next day with a message that bore the Sunspear and named gratitude without grace, because grace is not Dorne's language. Doran's hand had written fewer words than men of the Reach would have written. It had written precisely the right ones. Ned folded the letter and placed it where things that must not be lost went. He wrote an answer and then burned his letter rather than send it, to remind himself that some truths were not for ravens. In Sunspear, Ashera stood one evening on the highest walk and watched a crescent moon make a bowl for stars. She touched the stone with her fingers and let the heat soak into her. A woman who had been her maid since childhood brought her a shawl even though the evening was warm, because some kindnesses occur regardless of weather. Ashera said, "He kept his promise." And the maid said, "He will keep it again." And neither of them said what promise they spoke of. Oberyn took a lover with hair like the inside of a walnut shell and kin that tasted of salt and limes, and told Doran at breakfast a joke that made his brother cover his mouth with his hand so he would not show his teeth. "You are not wrong," Doran said afterward. "You are merely faster than the rest of us." "I tire of being right too early," Oberyn said, stretching like a cat. "It makes the applause thin. How are we to repay this debt, brother? Do we keep the northern boy's secret until he is a man? Do we truss up Tywin Lannister like a festival boar and carry him through the streets?" "We will keep the secret," Doran said. "We will put no boars in the street. It is enough for now that the man was told no and had to swallow it." He leaned back, eyes half closed. "Do not snarl. There will come a day when the world's table has been set for us, and we will put our hand on the knife then. Today we eat bread. And what will we spread on it?" Oberyn asked with a smile. "Patience? It is a thin sauce." "Justice," Doran said. "We began with it. Perhaps we will be fortunate enough to finish with it as well." At court, things that seemed small began to matter. A captain of gold cloaks who had made a practice of taking bribes found himself discharged. A baker who had sold straw as flour found himself flogged. A hedge knight of the Reach who had mocked a Dornish woman for her loose scarf found himself mocked in turn by a king who had no patience for men who thought cruelty wit. Robert ate and drank and whored and hunted, but sometimes he did those things after listening, and sometimes he listened to the right men. The realm liked him for it, as realms do. The Lannisters' absence made a new shape in the courtly air. Without a golden queen, ambitious men scented openings like hounds scent a fresh track. The Tyrells sent their fattest casks and their politest letters. Paxter Redwine sent ships to patrol the Mander's Mouth and wrote fussy dispatches wrapped in lavender and reason. Hoster Tully wrote letters that demonstrated why rivers wear down stone. Stannis wrote lists. Renly told jokes that improved with practice. Varys listened for dragons and found storms. Littlefinger was still a minor lord in the Vale with a wound on his side and too much cleverness for his purse. He sent a purse anyway. Jon Arryn slept at last. Word came that a squall had split the royal fleet that bore down on Dragonstone, that the Red Keepers of Dragonstone had fired braziers on the towers and stacked pitch kegs in the cellars and sworn to a queen in labor that she would not be taken alive, that during the storm a babe was born, a girl with hair pale as the moon, that a woman bled and died, and that a boy of 9 took his sister's hand on the deck of a ship stripped to rigging and sailed into a world that had no place for him. Stannis stormed Dragonstone anyway in time. He took it by list and by lack of laughter. He wrote to say so, and Robert put the letter away with a look that meant he would make fun of it later and did not now because there was too much else. Time laid more dust over the city. Tywin counted at the rock. In Dorne, Arryn Martell grew in shade and cleverness, and Oberyn's daughters grew in number and variety. In the north, Catelyn bore Ned a boy and a girl, and then more, and the hours arranged themselves into years. Jon grew with a quickness that hurt. The boy's gaze, the way he watched Ned at his practice, the way he held the wooden blade with a care for balance. When winter came down properly, the weirwood's face blinked snow like tears, and in the yard, a little boy with dark hair and gray eyes and a solemn mouth swung and held himself to the rule of a father who would never tell him that he was all he was for. Once, years after the Day of Heads in the courtyard, a raven came to Winterfell with a note as thin as skin and as dangerous as a knife's thought. The seal was Sun and Spear. The hand was Doran's, slower now but no less exact. It said, "The lion moves." It said, "Patience is food if a man can stand to eat it." It said, "The secret has not come to me a second time from other mouths." Finally, for what you did, Winterfell will have shade here in a place that does not love shade. Ned placed the letter in the hollows of the heart tree and left it there for the old gods to read, because he did not think the new gods would care for such small politics. When Jon asked him, a little older, why the Dornish men had stood behind him in a room where no one had asked them to. Ned took the boy to the wall walk above the winter town and looked down at the rooftops like backs of sleeping beasts and at the smoke like banners and said, "Because men remember better the things you do than the things you say. And because sometimes the right thing to do is so plain a blind man could feel it with his hands." "Was it plain to you?" Jon asked, squinting into the wind. "No," Ned said softly. "That's the truth of it. It never is. You do your best. You try to keep from lying when you can. And you lie only when there is no choosing otherwise, and then you stand by your lies as you would by your children." Jon turned that over like a stone, not sure yet what lived beneath it. "Is that why you named me Jon?" he asked, because boys ask things sideways. "I named you for a man I trust," Ned said, and smiled at his son without letting too much pain into it. Trust matters. In Sunspear, on a day when wind off the Sea of Dorne had chased the heat back into its caves, Doran Martell watched Oberyn teaching Obara to set her feet. The child scowled, stubborn and beautiful with sand on her cheek. "Too fast," Oberyn said, striking her lightly with the butt of his spear and making her cheeks flare. "Too slow, too angry. All of these are as deadly as a sword point." "I am always angry," she snapped. "Yes," he said, approving, "but in the right direction." Doran smiled slightly and lowered his eyes so his brother would not see. He thought of a northern lord standing in a hall hung Hitch Lannister red, saying names with no music in them, and of a king who had been made by killing a friend and was now trying to make himself by refusing a marriage. He thought, keeping a promise changes the shape of more things than a broken sword. He thought, one day we may ask more. He thought, not yet. In Casterly Rock, a man who did not forgive wrote by candlelight. The words were neat, the thoughts neat. He placed a wax seal on a missive and gave it to a man who would never be suspected and said, "Deliver." The missive was for a woman in the Westerlands whose son had the kind of wit that grows knives behind smiles. It asked for calculations, promised returns. It did not forget. It never would. Years later, when men spoke of that first summer of King Robert's rule, they said that it had been bright with hunts and full tables and tournaments that glinted like coins spilled on a feast board. They said that the Lannisters sulked for a while and then were seen in court again, and that their number was slightly less and their cautiousness slightly more. They said that Dorne sent oranges and silence. They said that the Riverlands were as they had always been, a place where water did work and men worked with it. They rarely remembered the heads in the courtyard because memory is lazy and prefers the story to the stone. They did not know they were living in a world that had been bent very slightly by the weight of a few men's decisions at a hot tower and a cool hall and in the long shade of a tree that looked out on winter. Ned Stark remembered. He remembered because it was the sort of thing that made a man he was and unmade the man he might have been. Sometimes late, when the hall had gone quiet and the last of the men had gone to their beds and Catelyn breathed warm and steady beside him, he would rise and go to the window and look north at a sky that in summer was never truly dark and in winter was never truly clear. He would think of a girl on a bed and of a boy in a cradle and of a prince who had sung and believed he could build a song the way a mason lays stones. He would think of a lion who had counted and counted until the numbers seemed to answer him. He would think, without words, of a choice made in a hot room in Sunspear and how it had planted spears in the right places so that when the wave came, it met something that did not give. He would go to the yard at dawn and lift a sword and feel his shoulder answer him with the honesty that metal demands, and then he would set the sword down and sit with his sons and watch them eat bread and butter and take too much jam. Jon would look up at him with that careful, thoughtful look that had been there since he had first opened his eyes, and something in Ned's chest that had been born at the tower would stir. It was not joy. It was not pain. It was the thing that lives where both of those meet and will not let a man become something smaller than himself. Once, in a summer that already smelled a little of frost, the king came to Winterfell with a train that set the town chattering for 2 weeks and made the kitchens into hell and heaven by turns. He embraced Ned on the steps and clapped him so hard on the back that Ned nearly lost his breath. He admired Catelyn, gentle and honest in his admiration, and he ruffled the hair of a brood of children who would one day be stories in a world that did not yet know their stories. He drank, he hunted, he wept, he remembered. They stood at the heart tree at dusk, a stag and a wolf where 1,000 years watched, and Robert said, "I could have done worse than marry a woman like your lady." "You could have done worse," Ned said. "You could still do worse." Robert laughed and then shook his head. "I have not been a good king," he said softly. "I have been a loud one. Maybe the realm needs a loud king to drown out the old voices." He looked sideways at Ned. "They told me no once. Do you remember?" "I do," Ned said. "Good," Robert said with a fierce grin. "Then maybe we have a chance." They might. It is a strange thing, how a word spoken in one hot room can change the course of a river not yet born. In Sunspear, a prince marked another day with the small ritual of stillness that he hoarded. In Casterly Rock, a lord counted and thought and shaped the counting into knives that would one day be taken up. In King's Landing, a spider hummed and smiled and went where silk goes while men move. In the north, a boy who bore two names in two different worlds stood in snow and watched his breath turn to a cloud. And in that cloud lived a life he did not yet know he would have. The wind came late to that high place where stones remembered, and it said nothing men could understand. But it moved the dry grass and rattled the thorns and lifted a rag of white that had caught in a bush, and then it went on.